Hey everyone, this week we're going to be talking about the best way to use presets in Adobe Lightroom. So if you don't already know, presets are filters which you can apply to your images in Lightroom, and they will automatically adjust a number of parameters all at once in just one single click. So on the face of it, quite powerful. Lots of people use them, but I personally don't use them very much. I'm going to get into that a little bit more throughout this video. But just a few caveats first. Firstly, I know a lot of people do use presets, and I'm not saying don't use them. If you like to use them, that's great. I know a number of photographers who use them and sell their own presets, and absolutely go out and buy those because it really is a good source of income for a lot of people. And I've got to admit, in rare circumstances, I do actually use presets, but I'll get into that at the end about how I use them and how I think it's the best way to use presets. And finally, it's just my opinion, so I'm sure everybody's got a different opinion. If you want to leave yours below in the comments, whether you agree with me, disagree, or if you just want to give us a bit more information and help people learn about presets, then please do that just down below. But right now I'm going to show you why I don't use presets, and I'm also going to edit an image and show you my process and workflow of how I edit that image without using the presets. Okay, so very generally speaking, there are two categories of adjustments we can make to our image, and that's global adjustments and local adjustments. So global is when you adjust the sliders and it will affect every part of your image equally at the same time. And local will just change specific areas specified by you and just make changes to those areas. So if we take this image of Witness Pass and we just adjust the exposure, we can see that's changing the exposure over the entire image equally all at the same time. But if I go up here to the Selective Tools palette, I can add a linear gradient, for example, change the exposure, and now it's just affecting the area where my gradient resides. And I can do that with different types of masks. I can use the radial gradient, for example, and again it will only affect that area. So we'll just reset that. So if we go to the presets panel, these are just the presets that come with Lightroom. I'll go to landscape, since that's what we're editing, and I'll come down to, say, this one. Now we can see that's made a difference. If I turn it on and off, it's warmed it up a little bit, brought out a little bit of detail in the foreground, a bit of contrast, a bit of clarity, but we've still got a really blown out sky, and that's because it's affecting the entire image equally, and it doesn't really know which areas of my image I want to adjust individually. And we can take a look at a couple more examples of how that filter will affect different images. This is a shot taken in Wales, and we'll just put that filter on there. Once again, we'll see it has warmed it up, brought out a little bit of detail and clarity, but again we've got that sky at the top which is really blown out, and it's not really going to give me my final results that I want. I can use that filter, it might give me a good starting point, but I'm still going to have to do a lot of work to the image. I would probably go into the Selective Tools, select Sky, and then I would bring down the exposure of that just to bring detail back in the sky, maybe the highlights, and I would probably use something like a linear gradient in the foreground, bring a bit of clarity back there, maybe bring the shadows up just a little bit, and it would take a lot of work. If we look at this example, this was taken in Scotland earlier this year. We'll apply the same filter. It's not done a bad job to this, it's created a nice effect in the sky, a little bit of colour there, a bit of warmth, but all of the foreground, it doesn't realise that this is all silhouetted and the shadows are too dark. It hasn't done anything to bring those up, and what I would need to do is go in there with a linear gradient, bring up the shadows, get some detail back there. So there's going to be a lot of work required. And for that reason, I don't really feel a need to start with a preset. If I'm going to have all that work to do anyway, I might as well just start without the preset and find my own way through the image and find what works for me. And that way I'm going to get a more bespoke style and my own feel and vibe and mood in the image. It is nice to go through these and just select a different starting point. It can be good for that. But what I'm going to do now is reset this, and I'm just going to go through how I would edit this image from start to finish. This is a previous edit I've already made, and we're working towards something a little bit like this. So what I would tend to do to start with is just click on Auto here in the treatment, in the basic palette. And you could say that's a little bit like using a profile, because it gives you a starting point to work from. It's a one-click feature. It'll make a lot of adjustments globally to the image, and then you can start adjusting from there. So whether you're going to start from a preset or using the auto button, just remember it is working globally, and you are going to have to do a lot more work on your image from that point, and quite a lot of local adjustments as well. So once I've got that set to auto, from here I can start tweaking my exposure. And it didn't do too bad of a job to start with, to be honest, so I'm going to leave it around about the same, maybe just a tiny touch higher, like that. Contrast is fine, I think. Highlights, I'm going to bring those down a little bit more, maybe just down to around about -96. Shadows, they're okay. Around about there is fine, I think. The auto's done a pretty good job, to be honest. I don't really need to do too much to this right now. I'm not going to touch the presence sliders right now. So texture, clarity, dehaze, I'm going to leave all those, and I'm going to adjust those locally. I'll get to that soon. And what I'm going to do now is just raise the temperature of the image. Just to bring some colour into the sky there. Because it was quite a colourful, warm sunset when I took this image, and it didn't quite capture that in the raw file. So that's nice, but it's a little bit oversaturated now, so I'm going to bring down the vibrance, and I'm going to bring down the saturation as well. Okay, now from here I'll probably play around with my colour sliders. So we've got hue, saturation and luminance sliders here, and I will usually start with the hue. So I'm finding that the sky is a little bit too yellow. I want that a little bit more orange. I remember it being a little bit more orange than that, so bring down the orange slider a bit to -10. The same with the yellow, I'm going to bring that down. Now you don't want to go too far, that's going to make it too red and pink, and going the other way will be too green, but just bringing it down slightly. That's bringing it closer to how I remember it on the evening. And I'm finding that my sky, it's a little bit too cyan. I want it a little bit more blue than that, so I'm going to bring the blue across a little bit to around about there. Okay, so we'll move on to saturation. Now I already brought the global saturation and vibrance down, but I'm going to bring down the orange and yellow a little bit more still, because it's still a little bit oversaturated in the sky there. So just bring down the orange and the yellow. That's looking a bit more natural now. And then finally luminance. This will just change the brightness basically of the different colours. So I'll just bring down the orange a little bit, make that a little bit darker. Same with the yellow. And I'll do the same with the blue as well, just to darken my sky a little bit. Not too much, around about there. Okie dokie. So I think that's all of my global edits that I want to do right now. and I'm going to start using some selective masks. So we come up here to the palette with the selective tools, and I can use Select Sky to start with. Click on that, it'll start detecting the sky area, and you can see the red area there. It's done a fairly good job of detecting the sky. So from here, all I'm going to do is bring down the clarity and texture a little bit. So I'm going to come down quite far with the clarity because I want quite a soft sky. I don't really want all that contrast and sharpness in the sky. I'll bring down the texture as well. Texture is similar to clarity, but more the finer detail, finer edges. And I'm going to bring the dehaze up a bit. That'll bring a bit of contrast and saturation into the sky, so I don't want too much, but I'm just about 1 to be honest, so that's more or less it for that. So I'm going to close that now, and what I want to do now is adjust the bottom half of the picture. So I'm going to go back to my selective mask palette, choose linear gradient, and I can bring that up from the bottom of the image up to about there, just above the top of the mountains, and I'm going to bring back some detail in the shadows by pulling up the shadow slider to around about there, and I'm going to compensate for that by, because I think that's made some of my brighter areas too bright now, so I'm going to bring the exposure back down a little bit, and also maybe the whites just a touch. And I'm going to bring the clarity up now because I want a bit more detail in my foreground and the texture. Not a lot, just about 3 I think for the texture. Okay, we're starting to get there. But what I want to do now is bring this into Photoshop to do some more special effects really, and to really emphasize some of the features in the image that really give it that sense of warmth and what I was experiencing on the evening when we had that sunset, just to make it more like it was in my mind at the time. So what I'm going to do is press Command and E on my keyboard. That'll be Control and E if you're on a PC, and that'll bring it into Photoshop. Okay, so we've got the image in Photoshop now, and what I want to do is get some really nice colours into this to really capture that sunset vibe that I was experiencing on that evening. So what I'm going to do is go to the Paint Bucket tool. So if we click out the contextual menu here, we've got Gradient tool. We'll select that. I've got a nice orange colour selected down here as my primary colour. And what I'm going to do is create a new layer. You can do that by clicking down here, bottom right, in the Layers palette, on the little plus symbol. And I'm just going to draw a gradient from the top left corner to around about the centre of the image. Maybe a little bit more than that actually, so I'll come down from about there. Yeah, something like that. And then I'm going to create another new layer. I'm going to switch to this dark blue colour, and I'm going to bring the gradient up from the bottom right to the middle. Around about like that, I think. Let's get this right. Yeah, I think that looks good. Okay, what I'm going to do is set the blue layer to multiply, and I'm going to bring down the opacity of that to about 40%. And the orange I'm going to set to screen and bring that down to about 85. And you see that adds a really nice glow in that top left hand corner, and the bottom right, it's got this really nice cool blue to offset that nice warm orange. Now what I want to do is get a bit of colour in the water, reflecting the colour from the sky. So what I'm going to do is flatten all of these three layers together into one new layer. So it's a combined layer of just our background image and then these two gradients. So I'm going to press Command, Alt, Shift and E on my keyboard, and you'll see that's made a new layer in my layers palette, which is a combination of the three layers below. And now, using the rectangular marquee tool, which is up here, second tool down on the left, I can just draw around the sky area. I can press Command and J on my keyboard, and that's made a new layer just with the sky. And what I'm going to do is go up to Edit, Transform, and I'm going to flip that vertically and bring that down now. I'll turn my layers back on, and I want to align this over my water area, but I need to mask some of that away. So I'm going to go to Layer, Layer Mask, Reveal All, and then I'll use the brush tool, and any areas that I paint with black will disappear now. I'll set my opacity to 100. I'm going to set the layer opacity to 60, well, around about 50. That means I can just see the area behind it. And now I know where to remove the areas in that layer with my mask. So you don't have to be really precise with this, just need to roughly mask that area so that the copied sky, which I've copied and flipped, is just over the water area. So I'm just rubbing it out on all these other areas. I'm probably going to get rid of this area at the bottom here. I'm going to crop this image later, but for now I'm going to leave it in, and I'm just going to rub out that sky area over the foreground. So I'll turn up the opacity on that layer again, and we'll see what that's going to do. So I'm going to set this whole layer to overlay, and I'll bring down the opacity just a little bit. And that's added some nice colour now into the water. Right, we can save that, close it, and that'll bring us back into Lightroom like so. And like I said, I'm going to crop this, so I'm going to maybe choose 16:9 for this, because I don't want that foreground dark area. It's not really adding much to the image, I don't think. And I'm probably going to have to make that even narrower or shallower by unlocking the little padlock sign up here, and now I can just bring that bottom bit up. I reckon about that is okay. So we've just got a tiny bit down here at the bottom just to anchor the image, but I think that's looking a lot better now, because the main area, the main focus of the image are the mountains and this really nice sky and the sunset. So just some final touches to this. I'm going to bring up the dehaze. I feel like I just need a bit more contrast in the image. Maybe bring the blacks down just to make this a little bit more moody. I'm going to bring the saturation down again. I don't want it oversaturated, even though it's a beautiful sunset. I just don't want it too gaudy. I don't want too much bold saturation in that image. And that's not too far away from my original edit. So we see in this one, I didn't have the area at the bottom. I completely got rid of that and just had the water. This has probably got a little bit more contrast in it, a little bit more colour, but I wasn't too far away with this one. But you can see it's so much more involved than just using a preset. So as you can see, the number one reason for not using presets in Lightroom, in my opinion, is just to have more control over your image. It's great having a one-click solution just to change your image with the presets, but that's only going to use the global sliders, and it's not going to affect different areas of your image, and you won't be using Lightroom to its full potential unless you use all of the tools in Lightroom and the Selective Masks. So try using those and really bring out the full potential in your image. But as I said earlier on in the video, I do sometimes use presets, and in my opinion these are the best way to use them. And the first one is if I want to have a different starting point for my image. So I showed you earlier in the video that I quite often use the auto button as a starting point for my edits. So I will click auto, that will adjust all the sliders, and from there I can start tweaking and really get it how I want it. But sometimes I might use a preset to do that, and it can be really good to get a different end result if you've got a different starting point. So maybe experiment, just look through some of the filters that come in Lightroom, or set up one of your own, apply that to your image, and then start tweaking from there. The second reason I might use presets is if I want a consistent look across a number of images. So perhaps I'm printing them out, putting them side by side, and I want them all to look quite similar. I will adjust one image, create a preset from that, and then apply that to all of the images. And that way it will help to keep a consistent look across all of the series of images. And finally, I will sometimes apply a preset to an image that I've edited in Lightroom, then taken away into Photoshop and brought back to Lightroom. So the benefit of this is that normally when you apply a preset, it will automatically adjust all of the sliders in Lightroom. And if you say apply another preset, it will just change those sliders. But what happens if you take it into Photoshop and make some edits there and bring it back is that all those sliders will then be reset. So it will keep all of the edits that you originally made in Lightroom before you took it into Photoshop. But after bringing it back into Lightroom, those sliders are all at zero basically. And then when you apply the preset, it will apply all of the effects and filters of that preset, but it won't override your original changes in Lightroom. And that can create some really good effects too. It can really just bring out some extra features in your image and really add just that little extra bit of artistic flair that your image might need. So play around with that and have some fun, and hopefully you get some good results. And that's about it for another video. So thanks a lot for watching everyone. Really appreciate it as always. If you're new to the channel, as I always say, you can click down here on the big red button or over here on my face. That way you'll keep up to date with everything I'm doing each and every week. There's a new video every Sunday morning, 10 AM UK time. So I hope you'll catch me next week for the next one. Until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.